Imagine a man who walks among us, quiet, unassuming, blending into the crowd. You wouldn't look twice at him, but beneath the surface, he's hiding a monstrous secret. Declan Moore lives by a code. He kills those who've escaped justice. He's methodical, precise, and terrifyingly patient. His victims never see him coming, until it's too late. But as his darkness grows, one detective begins to suspect there's more to Declan than meets the eye. Tonight, we'll step into the mind of a man who isn't just a killer. He's something far more terrifying. This is Shades of Silence. Listen closely. If you dare. Shades of Silence. By day, Declan Moore was a shadow. He moved through the halls of the Miami Metro Police Department with an eerie calm, his presence barely noticed, like a ghost that slipped between worlds. To his colleagues, he was just the quiet blood-spatter analyst, a man who spoke little and smiled even less. But beneath the cold, methodical exterior lay a dark hunger, a beast that fed on death. Declan was a killer, not the wild, frenzied kind that left behind sloppy scenes of carnage. No, Declan was precise. He didn't kill for pleasure or revenge, at least not in the way most understood. His was a need, a primal urge that clawed at his insides, gnawing at him until he fed it. And when he did, it was clean, meticulous, surgical. The code. He lived by it. Only those who deserved it. Only those who had slipped through the cracks of justice. The ones who thought they had escaped their sins. But no one escaped Declan. That night, the moon hung low over the city, casting long shadows on the cracked pavement of Miami's forgotten streets. Declan's pulse quickened as he walked through the alleyways, feeling the familiar, twisted excitement building inside him. It was always the same before a kill. His senses sharpened, the world became clearer, more focused. Victor Bain. The name slithered in his mind, cold and sharp like a knife's edge. A serial rapist who had slipped through the system one too many times. Bain had eluded the law by twisting it to his advantage. Lawyers, judges, paid off witnesses. It didn't matter. Declan had his own justice. He'd tracked Bain for weeks, studying him, learning his habits. He knew where he slept, where he drank, where he hunted for his next victim. The beast inside Declan salivated at the thought. Bain didn't know it yet, but his days were numbered, and that number had just run out. Declan moved like a shadow, his footsteps silent as he approached the abandoned warehouse Bain used as his lair. The building loomed in the darkness, its windows shattered, the smell of mildew and decay heavy in the air. Inside, it was worse. Piles of garbage, rotting wood, and the sickening stench of old blood. It was the perfect place for what Declan had planned. Bain was there, slouched on a filthy mattress in a corner, his eyes glazed over from whatever cheap drugs he'd numbed himself with. Declan watched him for a long moment, his heart beating slow and steady, as if time itself had stilled. Then, without a sound, he stepped forward, the needle already in his hand. It happened quickly. The needle slipped into Bain's neck, and the sedative worked fast, dropping him into unconsciousness before he could even register what had happened. Declan watched as the man's body went limp, a faint smile curling his lips. The beast within him stirred, hungry for what was to come. Dragging Bain's lifeless body deeper into the warehouse, Declan's movements were calm, rehearsed. Every step felt ritualistic. He'd done this so many times before, and yet it never lost its thrill. The thrill of control, of knowing that he, and only he, decided when these monsters met their end. He had prepared the room earlier, plastic sheets stretched across the floor like a gruesome stage, surgical tools laid out with careful precision. The soft glow of a single hanging bulb flickered, casting eerie shadows across the room, making everything seem just a little less real. Bane awoke slowly, his eyes fluttering open, confusion giving way to horror as he realized where he was, and who stood above him. "Wah, what is this?" His voice was thick, slurred. He struggled against the restraints, but it was no use. Declan's knots were tight, the rope cutting into his flesh. Declan said nothing at first, just watched him with cold, detached eyes. He could feel the beast inside him now, pacing, eager for the blood to flow. Slowly, he stepped closer, the sound of his footsteps soft and deliberate. "You think you're safe, don't you?" Declan's voice was a whisper, but it cut through the air like a blade. "That the law can't touch you, that you've outsmarted everyone." Bane's breathing quickened, panic creeping into his voice. "Look, man, I don't know what you think I did." Declan's fist shot out, striking Bane hard across the face, silencing him. The man's lips split, blood dripping onto his chin. Declan felt a surge of satisfaction as he saw it. The beast inside him roared in approval. "You know what you did," Declan said, his voice soft, almost soothing. "You've hurt so many, taken what wasn't yours. Now it's my turn." He picked up a scalpel from the tray, the metal glinting in the dim light. Bane's eyes widened, his body trembling as Declan traced the blade across his skin, not cutting, yet, but letting him feel its cold promise. The room seemed to grow smaller, the air thicker, as Bane's fear filled the space like a living thing. Declan leaned in close, his breath hot against Bane's ear. "You'll feel every moment of this, every single cut." And then he began. The scalpel moved with expert precision, slicing through flesh with a quiet, almost gentle sound. Declan wasn't in a hurry. He liked to take his time, to savor the fear, the agony in his victim's eyes. Bane screamed, his voice raw, but no one would hear him. No one would come. The warehouse was far from the city, isolated, and Declan had made sure the room was soundproof. It was just the two of them, locked in this private hell. Blood pooled beneath the table, warm and sticky, but Declan paid it no mind. His focus was on the artistry of his work, the slow dissection of a man who had thought he could outrun justice. As the hours dragged on, Bane's screams grew weaker, his voice a hoarse whisper, begging for mercy. Declan ignored him. The beast inside him was almost sated, but not yet. Not until the last breath left Bane's body, not until the blood had stopped flowing. When it was finally over, Declan stood over the broken, lifeless corpse, his hands covered in crimson. The room smelled of iron and sweat, the air thick with death. Declan's heart beat slow, calm. The beast was silent now, content. For the moment, carefully, he cleaned the scene, erasing every trace of himself, leaving only Bane's body as a message to the world. Justice had been served. The next morning, Declan stood with the rest of the police force as they examined the crime scene. His face showed nothing, just the same cold detachment they all knew. But inside, he smiled. Another monster was gone. Yet as he watched the detectives talk, he felt a prickle at the back of his neck. Detective Laura Quinn stood a few feet away, her eyes fixed on him. She knew something. Declan could feel it. Their eyes met, and for a split second, Declan saw a flicker of suspicion in her gaze. It was enough to send a shiver down his spine. The beast inside him stirred once more, but Declan turned away, his mask firmly in place. For now, the game continued. But one day, soon, the beast would need to be fed again, and someone would have to die. Subscribe to Horror of History for true horror stories and true crime documentary.